Okay, if you look at your leaflet then, that I've given you the pictures, you'll find the next one I want to talk about is the cottage, as I call it. It's never been given a proper name. That's the building there, that one. I simply call it, it's called Chase Farm nowadays. Okay, now you might not have noticed that if you go down towards Hensford, down Hill Street, and you can see the Cross Keys. Now, just before the Cross Keys is that building. On the same side as the Cross Keys. Today it's owned by Friels Building Company. But that is the house in 1660, and I've taken it back to 1660, or even earlier, that in fact was lived in by Cassandra, who was the wife of Thomas Everson. Her mother, Joan Watson, actually owned the house. And you've got, in fact, there, you've got her probate. And that'll tell you roughly what was the contents of the place. Fortunately, there are not any words that we won't understand. I spent a lovely day the other day going through an old English dictionary, trying to find the meaning of some of the words that are in some of these probates. But fortunately, there's none there. Most of them were to do with cattle. But when Joan made her will out in 1669, that probate will was read out. And you can see that Cassandra, who'd moved to live with her because her husband had died from the Cross Keys, and she wasn't running it, she moved in with her mother into the cottage, and the house was then given to her and to her grandson. The hearth tax for that building suggests that it's got 3 fireplaces. So again, a big building. I can actually testify to that because when I started doing the history of Hensford, I went to the place there and I asked them, could I look around? Being cheeky, people could only say no. And they actually said, yeah, by all means, you can look around. But we're not going to look with you. We'll let you up and you can go up into the attic and everything and have a good look round. While I was looking round, I came across those fireplaces with the carvings and that on them. And I took photos of those fireplaces. And there are 2 of them in the building with those carvings on. And I thought, well, later on, I'll find out, do they mean anything? So I went up and I went into the attic, and I'd have loved to be able to do that dendrology, because the beams up there are the very old beams. And that would have proved once and for all how old the actual building was. When I got downstairs, I said, oh, thanks very much for that. Very interested. They said, oh, well, we never go up there because it's haunted. I thought, cheers, thanks for letting me up there, not telling me. I'm glad you didn't actually tell me because I might not have gone up there. But in fact, I think, again, it's another one of these hauntings. Going on about the fireplaces with those sort of carvings on them, we have a local had a local historian years ago, God bless his cotton socks, who made wonderful statements but never gave any idea as to where he got the things from, which is not history. If you're going to make a statement as a historian, you at least let people know where you got your facts from. But he didn't. And so you had to sometimes take what he said with a pinch of salt. Now, he said that that building was originally owned by the bishops of Lichfield. And it dates back, or it dated back, there's a building there in 1290 or something like that. And I thought, well, that sounds a little strange, considering Hensford's not really known until way after that. So I took pictures of that, and he said that those are the heraldic designs of the Lichfield bishops and that. And I sent them off to the Royal College of Heraldry. Having paid my £80 for them to have a look at it, I got a letter back saying they're totally made up. They're an artisan's way of making the building look pretty. And I thought, that's only £80. I hope to meet that historian again, you know. But you do occasionally get people like that who will make statements and they don't actually prove where they've got them. And he was well known for that. The annoying thing was, every now and again, some of the things he said were right. So it was a case of what is he saying that is right and what isn't right, you know, and you had to keep checking. Well, that farmhouse then stayed in the family, and the next we really hear about it is not until about the 1780s. And by then, a chap called Richard Spencer has moved in, and he is what's known as a country jockey. Now, by that, it means basically they don't ride at the big meetings, they tend to ride only in the countryside meetings, the small meetings at the countryside. However, he did win the Doncaster Cup a couple of times, so he wasn't that much of a country jockey. But he lived there, and he actually did own some of his own horses and had them trained. And it gradually became a place for not having stables, but where the trainers actually lived. And their places where they had the stables were near Hensford Hills, further away. One of the interesting characters who was there later became a trainer, and a very well-known trainer at Hazel Slade, William Saunders, was there as a young lad, and the family had rented the house out. Sorry, had taken over the house. I got a letter, and I don't know if I've told you this before, I might have done, excuse me if I have. I got a letter from a lady who was tracing her family tree. And she wanted to know, did I know anything about an Eliza Spencer? And I said, well, not at the moment, but I'll do a little bit of digging. So I did a little bit of digging, and I found that Eliza Spencer's father was a butcher in Hensford around about 1820. And Eliza herself got a job as a maid in that cottage, the building there, when it was owned by the Saunders family. William was a strapping 20-year-old lad. And I had the undoubted pleasure, or not, of having to write to the lady concerned and say, I found Eliza. She's one of 4 children. Father is William Saunders. But he never married her. He never married her. So she had 4 children, did Eliza, with William. And he looked after them all, made sure they all had good jobs and everything. And I said, I don't know whether he invited them when he got married himself. He had 6 children by his own wife. So quite a lad was our William Saunders. He also got heavily involved with Mr. Palmer of Rugeley. Frequently at race meetings with Mr. Palmer. So that house has a little bit of history to itself. It was later bought by the Coal Board. The Coal Board bought quite a few of the old buildings in that area of Hensford. And it was later bought round about the 1890s. It was bought by the Coal Board, but it wasn't. It was used as a farm, and the Thornley family moved in and stayed there, running it as a farm, and it was then known as Chase Farm. That's when it actually gets its name of Chase Farm. They carried on there until about the 1950s, 1960s. And then I lose it in history. I'm not quite sure what happened next. But the next thing I knew, Friel's Building Company have taken it over. And it's now being used, as I say, as their offices. And they built the little estate that's around it at the back and to the side of it. They built a little estate. The final one that I want to talk about is a little bit further in Hensford, is the actual Anglesey Hotel. I think most of you might know it now, Hensford Lodge. And it's nice to know they've used the old spelling of Hensford, Edgeford Lodge. One thing about Wetherspoons is they are very, very good on local history. They make sure they don't make mistakes. And they actually contacted me on a couple of occasions to say, have we got that right, or is that right? And they actually, I was amazed. I walked in and they've actually got a statue of a jockey there. Absolutely flabbergasted me, because the building itself was built in 1831 by Edmund Peel. Now, Edmund Peel's family came from Bury in Lancashire, and they'd made their fortune in cotton and iron. And having made their fortune, they looked around for somewhere to build a nice country mansion. And they found an ideal place just outside Tamworth called Drayton Manor. And they built Drayton Manor. That was their country mansion. And looking around as you do as gentry, you've got to have a hobby that means you're part of the gentry. And one of the good hobbies is horse racing. So they actually set up a stables not far away at a place called Bone Hill. And they ran stables from Bone Hill. For Hensford, they actually employed a chap called Thomas Warren as their main trainer. Now, Thomas Warren's connection with Hensford was the fact that he lodged at the Cross Keys Inn. That's where he lived, at the Cross Keys Inn. And so he must have convinced, when he found out Edmund Peel was looking for somewhere to build the stables and build a house, he must have conned him and said, well, it's a good place in Hensford. You know, good bit of land you can buy. And so Peel then moved to Hensford, and in 1831 he had the Anglesey Lodge built. It was called then Hensford Lodge, hence the name today. It's called Hensford Lodge, and he set up a stables at the back. Now, when I knew the Anglesey, all the stables were still there. And I think if you look at the picture there, you will see, I think you might just be able to see the stables that are at the back. I'm trying to find the pictures now. Yeah, it's the second picture there. You'll see there's a courtyard you go into, and that little building there is part of the stables at the back. And they were all like on a big courtyard, stables. Now, again, I hate to disagree with the Victoria County history, but I have to tell them they were wrong again. Because they put it down as a country house. And I said, wasn't built as a country house. It was built as a racing stables. And the house was a country house, but that wasn't the prime objective of the building. The prime objective of the building was to actually stable horses and train horses there. And to do that, Edmund Peel bought himself as a present, because his 40th birthday was was in 1831, the year of the building of the house. He bought himself a racehorse that cost £3,500. Now, £3,500 in the 1830s was a lot of money. But the one good thing was it had actually just won the Derby. So it was a good racehorse. Actually, the strange thing is, it had won the Derby, but on its second attempt. Now that may sound strange. Second attempt, you can't have a second attempt in the same race. Well, what happened was the first race was a dead heat. The only time the Derby has ever been a dead heat is in 1828. And the horse he dead heated with, and I've remembered it for the first time ever, was called the Colonel. And what they did, they decided they couldn't have a dead heat, so they had to have a runoff. And Cadland won the runoff. So he could claim that it actually won the Derby, but the original race, it was a joint winner. The only time the Derby's win, as I say, has been a joint winner. But Peel bought that horse, and he bought it purely as a stable horse, as a stud horse. He didn't buy it because of its racing abilities, but by the time in 1831 he bought it, it had finished, its racing career had gone. He tried to race it a couple of times and it came nowhere. So its racing career had gone. In fact, he kept it, and I think he kept it for 2 or 3 years, and then he sold it to a stable in France. He himself, by that time, by about the 1840s, strange enough, was getting fed up of horse racing. He got a new hobby, and the new hobby was black-faced sheep, which he was then rearing. And he more or less abandoned Hensford Lodge and went to live back at home in Tamworth. All he left was a manager who ran the stables and kept horse racing, but not of any great value. When he finally died in 1850, the place was then sold, and it was sold to a London chap who came up and actually bought the place because he'd heard rumours that Hensford was about to get its railway station. And if you look at the geography of Hensford, the only place you can put a railway line is where it is today. Try putting it anywhere else and you've got hills. Hensford is very, very hilly, surprisingly enough. And it would have cost a fortune to put it anywhere else other than where it is today. Now that's the reason Hensford moves from by the Cross Keys to where it is today. Because the railway station was built just up the road from where the Anglesey actually is. And also when the mines opened up a few years later in the 1870s, they opened up on even further away. So the whole of Hensford had actually moved. They moved a considerable amount. So we've got it then actually became a hotel. It actually became a commercial hotel. It's called the Anglesey Commercial Hotel. And it was run by a chap called Escrut. And in Hensford we have an Escrut Street named after him. He actually was a horse trainer, but his wife was a business lady, Margaret, and she actually ran the hotel while he carried on training his horses. And And it became a commercial hotel, and then eventually it actually became a pub. When Esfrit died, his wife Margaret continued to run the place for a few years, and then she sold up and moved out. And it was bought by the Anglesey family, Paget family, who ran, they bought the whole place and then just rented it out as a pub. They even sold bits of land off. I don't know whether you've been to Hensford recently. There's a little area called the Lightworks, which is, I think it's got Bella's Cafe and things like that in it, and lots of little shops. That was a factory run by the Moore family. They made clothing. And that was part of Anglesey land. And in the 1870s, Moore bought that section of land from the Anglesey. In the 1830s, they sold even more land off. But at one time, they owned all down Anglesey Street towards Stafford Lane. And they sold all that area of land off as well, which left them with just the pub itself. That was the brewery. Because by the 1930s, the pub had been taken over from the Paget family by breweries. They bought it off the Paget family. And it remained a pub for the rest of its time. In the Second World War, it got quite a reputation. The American soldiers used it frequently or frequented it. So did the ladies of Hensford, frequented it. And it got a nickname of the cowshed. Don't want to go into any details as to why, but I think you realise why it was that. I never forget when I was teaching, a young woman member of staff came, and she said that she'd had a wonderful night in the Anglesey. What a lovely place! And I sort of crept over and told her its reputation. They never went there again, because it was not given a wonderful reputation. Now, it would have stayed as a pub, except for one thing. When meals became very, very popular, people just didn't go out for a drink, they went out for a meal. They couldn't serve meals because they had nowhere to prepare them except for their own kitchen. And health and safety would not allow them to do that. So they thought it best that they actually sold up. And when they sold up, it was bought by the building company, Pritchard's. And Pritchard's bought it and used it as their head offices. Now, Mr. Pritchard was very interested in the history of that building. And he went to loads of auctions and that, and bought quite a bit of the paraphernalia that he could find that might belong to the Paget family and to the building. And he used part of it as a little museum, which you could actually, I remember going, and he gave a talk the one night there for us. Very, very friendly chap. I've known him for years, but he did a lot for the area. Unfortunately, Mr. Pritchard had a roving eye, and rumour has it that his wife caught the roving eye a couple of times with young ladies, and she, in no uncertain terms, told him, "Pack it in, and I want half of what you've got, or I will actually take you to court." So rather than have his name pulled through the mire, he decided to sell up, and his wife got half. And that is when Wetherspoons decided to take over. it's amazing how time flies. I think that was round about 2015 or 2016. But Wetherspoons had quite a shock because they thought they were, onto a good thing, which they were, but they didn't realise how much it was going to cost them because it's a Grade 1 listed building. And they didn't realise that, I don't think. Well, they must have done, but they didn't realise how much work actually needed doing. And it took them well over a year to build, to rebuild. And of course, they had to replace the roof and everything. And with Grade 1 listed buildings, you have to replace like for like. You cannot just replace with what you want. And so it took them a long, long time to actually replace it. They were allowed, even though it's a Grade 1 listed building, they were allowed to add onto the side of the building. And they have, in fact, built their kitchens and everything on the side of the building where, in fact, if you look back at the picture, those stables actually appear. Part of that appears there. They actually built their kitchens there. So now you go in, and that little was the entrance, that's the main door now, you go in there. And what I can say is that, like I said, one thing about Pritchards is they actually do keep to the original plan if they can. Well, thank you very much. I've spoken, I think, quite long enough. You've been very, very good.